Hi Gunnar, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, and you?
Yeah, very well, thank you, very well. Thanks for agreeing to come on the podcast today. Obviously, we met last week. We had a really interesting conversation on a flight back from Berlin, and I wanted to continue the conversation, obviously, on the podcast. And yeah, thanks for finding the time. I know you've got a busy diary.
No, my pleasure. I mean, like you said, it was quite coincidental, and yeah, I was really intrigued by some of the questions you had, so I'm really pleased being here.
Brilliant. You never know who you sat next to on a plane. You should always have a chat. That's what I've learned from it.
Exactly.
Okay, so if we want to get started, Gunnar, for the audience, just an introduction to yourself, bit of background on career history and your remit.
Sure. So Gunnar Menzel, I've been in the IT industry for 34 years. So I started when I was 17. Actually was quite lucky that I joined one of the first IT degrees in Germany. So I started my career in Germany. I was born in Germany. And I've been, like I said, been in IT for 34 years. I moved to the UK in 1999. I live in Manchester, in Sale. And ever since I moved to UK, so just about 22 years ago, 23 years ago, I work for Capgemini. I'm currently the CTIO, that's Chief Technology and Innovation Officer for North and Central Europe. So just to give you a flavor, it's about 50,000 staff, the size of North and Central Europe. So there's UK, the Netherlands, Germany, and the Nordic countries. And also the CTIO, Chief Technology and Innovation Officer for global public sector organization. So that captures all the public sector accounts that we have globally where we deliver IT services. My core competence actually sits in engineering. So I'm a software engineer by trade. Like I mentioned, in '87, I started my degree for 2 years to learn to program. And also, we'll probably get a bit more into detail in a second, also build data centers, infrastructure, environments, application, landscapes, migration, transformation, and the likes.
Amazing, amazing. Thanks for that introduction. So quite a large remit that you have currently.
I do. I think the key focus really is about helping organizations to make the most of technology. Now, as you know, as we all know, technology is becoming more and more important to all of our lives. This is particularly the case for organizations, companies that hadn't used IT before in that extent or to that extent. Like for instance, if you're listening to companies like in the auto sector, so car companies, if you had asked the CIO or CEO 5 years ago of a car company, what do you do? It's maybe a very straightforward question, very straightforward answer. We build cars. If you ask them today, most of them will answer, we're an IT company. They have a car, but they're also mostly focusing on software engineering capabilities. I'll give you an example. The S-Class, which is the biggest Mercedes you can buy today, has 100 million lines of code. 100 million lines of code in an S-Class. This is absolutely incredible in terms of the IT that they have, and so it applies to other sectors. So IT is becoming more and more important across all sectors, and I help organizations to make the most of IT technology.
Great. So heavy focus on digital transformation, would you say?
That's one aspect. I mean, digital is a loaded word. It's kind of everything's actually digital as soon as you use IT, because it's by nature digital. Digital really means that you're using technology to maximize the impacts. Like for instance, an organization typically uses digital capability to maybe increase customer experience or gain new markets. So you can use look at banking, for instance. There's a big shift over the last 5 years. Look at the capabilities that are now shifting on to the mobile phones, purely because customers like us, expecting that you can do anything you want with a bank on your phone. Before, I mean, if you looked at your my banking app, for instance, that I use, even half a year ago, I think I couldn't do standing order changes on it. I had to go on the laptop to do that. Why is that? It's silly. Why can't I also use that on the app? So digital transformation is about making best use of technology, and it's always the same. Technology is a means to an end. Clients, customers like a bank or an insurer, inadvertently don't really mind about the technology, they mind about the impact. So digital transformation is all about really focusing on the impact that you can create, which is typically customer experience improvements, or you gain new market share, or you can accelerate something, or you can deliver better quality.
Brilliant. So Gunnar, for me, where I'd like to start is we work with a lot of candidates, and quite a lot of candidates have aspirations of maybe being a CTO themselves one day. What advice would you give for someone, an engineer, software engineer, with these aspirations, perhaps quite early on in the career, but has these big goals? What would you advise to them?
So first of all, I think what's really important is ignore the title for a second. Now, when I started, or it was, I guess, 10 years or 15 years in my career. So like I said, I briefly touched on, I learned to be a software developer, and I was cutting code for the first 8 years of my career. I then moved and shifted more into infrastructure engineering. So I was building data center services. And then I kind of realized at a time that, so probably about 10 or 15 years in, that I was more moving into kind of an architecture role. So it was actually by accident. And the reason why I knew, in hindsight, I realized I was moving to architecture is because when I was in the engineering role, as an engineer, typically work against specifications. So when somebody comes up to you, say, can you implement this solution for me? Typically as an engineer, it's not always true, but typically as an engineer, the first question you would ask is, when do you need this? If you're an architect, the first question you would ask is, why do you need this? So it's a more kind of a shift in context, it's a shift in question. So I was moving more into an architecture role, and then I kind of went through my career another 10 years, and then I started finding myself into more kind of leadership capability or leadership roles. So it was all a bit more accidental. It wasn't really planned. And this is kind of my first suggestion to you. If you listen to this and you think, you're at your start of your career, your early 20s or mid 20s, and you think, wow, I want to become a CTO. The first suggestion I have is first understand, what does it actually mean to being a CTO? Because you might be surprised. If you love cutting code, CTO is not really, unless you're for a startup. And then you're not really CTO role, you're still an engineer, you're still a developer. So first really understand, what does it actually mean to you? I did do a really good exercise, probably about halfway through my career, through a career planning exercise, when they were forcing me to project myself into the next 5 years. Sometimes getting this silly question, or some people see it as silly, where do you see yourself in 5 years? It's actually not a silly question. It's actually quite good to really force yourself to project yourself a bit forward, to say, now it is today, what is it, 20th May of 2022. So just assume this conversation would happen in 2027.
Yeah.
What would you do? What are kind of the capabilities? And really kind of focus on the things that really you thrive in, or you really enjoy. Once you realize that, and then this might be a tagline of CTO, then you have a kind of an understanding of what the role actually entails. That's typically really the first step that you should do, particularly if you think, this is what I want to be. I have experiences, or I've seen in my career over the last 35 years, colleagues who have targeted a grade or a title, and then they became that title, and then they realized that 90% of their time that they're doing wasn't really activities they were enjoying. They had to do it because they had the title. So I remember sitting in a taxi, it was a Monday morning, and we were driving to an office, and I was asking my colleague, so how's your week going to be? We were in London, so away from home. And he said, I'm busy all week, so it's going to be busy. And I said, well, at least you enjoy it. He says, I don't really enjoy the first 4 days. Most of the work I do because I have to, because it's my role. I enjoy the Friday. And when you ask him what was the activity he was doing on a Friday, it was completely irrelevant or different to his role. Now, that's not where you should end up in when you're hopefully 30 or 40, to something that you don't enjoy. So think first, what would that look like? And then have that as a target. And then the second suggestion that I have is, once you know what you want to do, and maybe this is your CTO role, and then develop a plan. So think, okay, what are then the activities or the skills, the experience that I have to have in order to achieve that? And this is, by the way, the same if you want to become a Scrum Master, or you want to become a department lead, or you want to become a lead architect, or you want to move into enterprise architecture or into CTO roles. Kind of irrelevant. It's the plan that is important. So have then a target, as I mentioned before, and then you know where you are today. You know your age, obviously, you know your own capabilities. You have to be honest to yourself. What can I actually do today? What is still missing? And how do I then gain those experience or expertises? So have a plan that helps you to achieve those stages and those steps. And the third point is, make sure you don't do this on your own. So this is where a mentor program is absolutely critical. We quite often do this in Capgemini. You know, people come up to me and say, you know, I really love to do or work in those areas. I know, kind of have an idea how to do it, but I'm not really, because I don't have the experience. Maybe you could help, you know, give me some advice. And I'm a mentor to a number of colleagues who sometimes I don't see for 6 or 8 weeks, and then sometimes they pop up again and ask me sometimes quite insightful questions, and then I give some feedback, and then that helps them maybe to then develop their plan. So it's those three things: understand first, plan second, and then third, you know, use a mentor to maybe help you along those stages.
Brilliant, great advice. But when you think about it, it could be probably used in any way of life, isn't it? Like, so firstly, focus on what you enjoy, what you actually like doing, what are you passionate about. Then once you've got that, let's get a plan together. Let's work out how we do that. And then thirdly, get some support from mentors that have been there, done it, and can offer you some guidance.
It's not rocket science, I agree. I wish when I was you know, younger, that somebody would have told me that, because like I said, my career over the years was more accidental. Not quite true for the latter part of my career. So the last 10 years is a bit more planned. And that pretty much was coincidentally with the session that I mentioned, when somebody was asking me. This was, I think, 2008 or 2009. So remember where it was, in which room, and I remember the lady who asked me the question. I responded that as a stupid question. Who knows where I want to be in 5 years' time? She was explaining to me exactly what you said. No one always. She was asking me, actually, how do you do solution design? So how do you work as an architect? You know, how do you know how to transform? I said, well, it's easy. You know, you define the targets, your land of milk and honey. You then describe the plan, because you know where you are, and then you have your stages how to get there. And she says, why do you then do it differently in your career? Why do you then run around in Germany, say, plan laws without a plan? I said, well, good point. I never really thought it that way. So it's exactly how you say. So, you know, make sure and ignore those titles. I think that's really important. CTO, CIO, it's just a title. Understand the activities that you want to achieve. If that then equates to a CTO or a lead architect, okay. And then have a plan together with maybe a mentor to help you along those lines. No? Sometimes, of course, not easy to find the right mentor. Mentoring is not an easy activity, and being a mentee also, you have to have the right kind of expectation settings. Because, like I mentioned, I sometimes don't see my mentees for sometimes weeks or months. It's not needed. Actually, far from it. It's better to be separate. And then they sometimes pop up. Like I say, I'll have an hour call. They ask me some insightful questions. I give them some feedback, which is usually out of context, but that also helps them to then, you know, maybe formalize the next steps or stages.
Yeah, and for someone who is being asked for advice and potentially to be a mentor, can you give any like good advice on that? Like, is there any key things that you always do when you're mentoring someone?
Yeah, so a couple of key things that's really important in my view is it is not for the mentor to assess or to validate, it's to reflect. So it's really important, I feel, as a mentor to just you always will give subjective feedback or advice, because that's the point of the mentor. You are there because the mentee sees something in you that may help him or her. So as a mentor, you have to really make sure you don't assess or validate or change. I wouldn't do it this way. You should do it this way. If you do it this way. It's not for you as a mentor to decide it. What you should do is, this is a suggestion. Have you thought about this? Consider these steps as well. Maybe consider doing this or doing that. So it's always kind of a reflection that you do, never really a direct advice and guidance. Also for the mentee, is don't see the mentor as kind of a reviewer or a buddy or somebody who's a mate. There can be, but it's a different role. It's really kind of about, there shouldn't be any expectations in terms of next steps. I sometimes get mentees who come back to me and says, you're giving me this advice last call. Here's what I have done. It's not really, I mean, it's up to you to decide. You can take it or you leave it. It's a reflection. And, you don't have to also agree with me. You may have a different view. That's fine. I'm just maybe as a mentor, a bit older, I have my own subjective view in terms of my experience. It may not work for you, but it's a nice kind of, I find it a nice reflection. I mean, it helps me also to develop my career. But it's kind of this it's like it's like a separation almost of concerns, and you should just reflect, and you should advise and guide, but not direct and lead in impact. So you're not a reviewer, you're not a manager, you're a mentor. And sometimes I don't actually know my mentees that well. That's also another thing. No,
Yeah.
it's not for me to understand exactly where you came from, what your capabilities are. It's not an interview process. No, it's kind of almost irrelevant. It's much more to do with, giving you some advice around the next stages, not where you came from. It's more about, reflecting possibilities and opportunities, and maybe suggesting things that you as a mentee would never thought about. And that's kind of the value you're getting out of that conversation.
Brilliant. Can you think of in your career a time where you were being mentored and you had a particular great bit of advice that you've always took with you?
That's a good question. I think I remember one particular lady who was a mentor to me, and one thing that she said to me when I was working and I was kind of trying to find a way through my career planning. This was around promotion. So I was going for my next promotion, and I was really stressed by, providing the evidence and, making sure I've got everything in line, and it's really stressed by that. And she said to me something really insightful. She said, well, look, and this is in the context of Capgemini, it may not be applicable to other companies, so we have to see it within that context as well. This was in Capgemini. And she said to me, she said, look, promotion, you don't get promoted because you've done stuff. You go through the promotion process. You're invited to the process because you have credentials. The promotion is all about your potentials. So we promote you because you have more potential to have more impact as the next level in terms of your promotion. Because if you promote through the past, you almost also, and this is the way she phrased it, promote incompetence. Because you end up just sometimes getting to the next roles just because you've been there. We do this differently. It is down to, you get a ticket basically to get through the promotion process because you've done great stuff. But really the next stages is all about you projecting yourself forward and say, if I was promoted, this is a new stuff I can do because I have new enablements, and because, with a new promotion I may have better access to execs, or I have wider scope, or so it's this forward looking you should have a look at. And also this promotion process itself is this is also something she said, feel confident in yourself, what you know, and feel confident with the stuff you don't know. Can't know everything. Nobody knows everything. So she was German, and she said, it's a German phrase, if you know German, she said, Mut zur Lücke, which means have faith in stuff you don't know, and that's fine. So, and don't feel too stressed by it. I was a wreck, going through it, rehearsing, doing the night, and having to do work as well. And she says, you just don't take it. I mean, of course, it's serious,
Yeah.
but it's not seriously, and it's not, life and death at the end. And be confident with the stuff you don't know. It's fine. You were in the process because of a reason. But the real learning, or the real kind of value I took away from that was this, it's your potentials, it's the next stages, and that's really kind of liberating, because it means you can project yourself onto that, which nobody can validate either anyway.
Yeah.
And you can have this white, it frees you up a bit more to actually embrace yourself and be able to do what you actually like, rather than being fixed on this particular point, having to prove everything on this particular point, be perfect on this particular point. So this was quite a, I think I was quite a, now in hindsight, this is almost 20 years ago, I remember it still well. I think it was it was quite a nice reflection.
No, absolutely. I think something we do at Energize as well, the promotion, what you've done is a gateway, and then that's just to get you in the room for a promotion. Then it's about, okay, what can you do? What talk to us about the future? That's the more important thing.
And that's quite hard, however. So I find it difficult to then have that conversation about that future potential, because you have to anticipate, and you have to kind of understand, where's the company moving. You have to understand your value proposition. Another thing that you also, as a software engineer, have to really understand. You cut code, you write lines, you deliver a function, a service, a capability. That's good. But what's the value you provide? What is the impact that you create to the company? And therefore projecting that value against your career aspirations, connecting that with promotion is the ideal. I mean, I had this a couple of times, or maybe I was lucky, but colliding those three points, or connecting them, is so liberating. You come out an interview process feeling happy and content, and kind of you know that what you do you love. The more stuff you do, you love it more. You connecting that with the value you create, and the impact you make. I think that's that's a kind of area you should really focus on. Huh? Stuff you're good at, stuff that people need, stuff you get paid at. If you draw three circles, if you have a circle in the middle, that's kind of where you really should be focusing on. If you find that middle point, the connection between what you do, what you're good at, what people want, and you get paid for, I think that's the bullseye, so to speak. That's the kind of the perfect position to being in a fulfilling career.
Yeah, brilliant, absolutely. And I think again that can be relatable for lots of different industries as well, not just in
relevant. It's personal as well. Yeah. So we have people, or have colleagues, who do stuff they absolutely love. They do it for a charity, don't get any paid. Or you do stuff you love, nobody really needs it. So it's very good for yourself, but it's not really impact to society, or you don't get recognition for it. You have your own recognition, but I think, in my personal opinion, finding the intersection between these three questions, so something you're good at, you love, something people need and people pay for, if you find the intersection, and that is maybe being the CTO, or being an architect, or being a developer, I think that's perfect.
Amazing. And that leads me on to talking about, obviously, when you introduce yourself, you said you have is it 50,000 people that probably underneath reporting lines?
That's an interesting point, because in organizations such like Capgemini, there is no underneath or reporting line. Yeah, so you don't have to see that as, and I didn't introduce it as a reporting line either. There are 50,000 or thereabouts in the North and Central European scope, and I'm the CTIO for that. It doesn't mean they're all reporting to me. You're in organizations such like Capgemini, you have matrix organizations, and there you have regions like Germany or in the UK, fairly independent from a group structure, because you can't just imagine an organization that has 350,000 people and everything points to one point. Of course, we have a CEO, but he's a CEO of a group, and then in the group you have CEOs, and then in the CEOs you have regions. They themselves have almost independence to a certain degree. So most of my role is done through reputation, brands, influencing, value. People, I guess, or actually, at least I assume people listen to me because there's value behind it. So it's not necessarily that I don't manage 50,000 people now. So if I were, we certainly wouldn't be on this call because yeah, I'd be
Yeah,
busy
no, of
managing
course.
people now. So my roles, and you see that often for CTOs, you know, they are, I wouldn't say on the sideline, but you know, it's through influencing, through having a brand, you know, have people knowing what you stand for. That's another consideration. I mentioned this before, the value statement. You know, if you're a software developer, if you're an engineer, if you're still young in your career, also, it might be a bit a silly description, but you're starting to understand the impact you're making to the organization, and the reason why your organization employs you. It's not just, I guess, cutting code. There is a value to be had. You know, I still, you know, still subscribe to this idea that, you know, every single person is unique. There's still something that you have that nobody else has. So there's a value proposition that you have as an individual, particularly in IT, is of course very prevalent because, you know, it's a very thriving industry. And I think, you know, that's something that then translates into impact, connecting with potential. But the impact you're making is because the value you're providing. And if you connect that with people recognizing the value you can provide and the impact you make, you know, they naturally would come to you. So if that is natural, again, you have to ask others whether it's true, but I would have thought that some people do connect with me, not just because there's a CTIO title in my role. It's because I'm Gunnar Menzel, because, you know, I have a certain articulation, a certain brand that I have created over the years. Now, you can't do this within a week or a month or half a year within a company, but you have to think about this mostly, or ideally, most of the time, about the impact you create, the value you provide to the organization as a coder, as a software engineer, as an infrastructure engineer. And then you connect this also with the value statement of your company. So if you can connect those two things, you know that you're contributing directly to the success of your company. And then the more you're focusing on that, the more success you will have because the more value you will provide. And then naturally, more people will ask you, you do marvelous jobs, things, you help us to achieve certain things, ideally, of course, within the envelope of your company. And then you'll find, accidentally or not, you're very quickly into the next stages of your career anyway.
Brilliant. And something I was going to ask about, obviously in your 35-year career, I'm sure you've interviewed a lot of people. What do you look for in a particular candidate, outside of obviously technical background? What are the key things that you always try and find in a good hire?
That's very hard to describe. No, define good as a hire. It's very difficult to specify. I always have this opinion that you can never be sure when you hire, or you can never be sure to be hired, because only when you actually work with the company do you really understand what the company is like. Well, we can talk a lot, you can talk a lot about your capabilities, but at the end we will see the proof is in the eating. So I think that's first. So that's how we see it as well. You know, the first 3 months are really important in that kind of, you know, the first stages. But anyway, I think from a hiring perspective, I think there are a couple of characteristics. I think first, it absolutely surprises me quite often how little people use the tools that they have at their disposal to inform themselves when they go into the interview. Use LinkedIn. Very easy. My name is quite unique. You know, look me up on LinkedIn. There's quite often that I find candidates don't even bother to having a look at my profile. If you looked at my profile, you would have already learned a couple of things about me. You need that for the starting of the conversation, because this is all down to relationships. You don't need to know everything about me, of course not. But if you looked at my post, you knew probably that I was in Paris, as you did. I was in Paris this week because you looked at my post. You looked at, you know, we have a chateau there for training. So that, you know, that directly opens the conversation. If you looked at my Twitter feed, you probably figured that I ran 7 marathons, 23 halves, or that I broke my ankle 2 years ago. Small things. And you don't have to have a personal conversation right at the beginning, but it helps you to make a connect. So you can, you know, if you're also into running, you directly have some kind of a relationship. So, you know, interviews are stories. Interviews are stories about you, also stories about me. It's about connecting those stories and aligning them somewhere that makes sense. And then, you know, making sure that you have a conversation. You don't read your CV either. I can read it myself. So when you come to an interview, it's about your capability, the value you could or you think you can provide to the organization, and the reason to why you want to join. So first suggestion I have, you know, use the tools. They're not difficult, LinkedIn and Twitter. You know, just search them and have a look. That's, by the way, I do that all the time. Every time meetings, when I meet clients, the first thing I do is I look them up on LinkedIn because I want to get some kind of sense, context around them. I do have, I always connect on a personal level, but you have to, of course, be careful not to overstep the mark. You can't come onto the CV on the interview call saying, "Hey, Gunnar, I know you run 7 marathons. You know, what was your best time? You know, you should be really improving it. You know, so just use that subtly. So you know, whenever you find that's the right kind of connect, and then people say, "Oh, okay, so interesting." So you find some kind of rapport. I think the second that I'll look for is um, agility. So you know, or you could use common sense as a term. So when we have a conversation, you know, don't forget, I'm a human person. I'm not a machine. I'm not a CV validating machine. So, you know, I also enjoy having a conversation. I would hope it's the same for all my colleagues. So see that as such as well. And of course, have something to say. I mean, you know, sometimes I come onto a call. I had an interview this morning, an interview call, and you know, the candidate went through. I asked the candidate, "Could you just, you know, give me your most salient points of your CV?" And I had to stop the candidate twice because he didn't do the salient points. He gave me all the details. He read the CV, and I said, "Well, I can read your CV myself offline. Just give me the key points." And then he did, and then after 20 minutes, he said, "Right, okay, this is the end of my CV." I said, "Okay, um, what else would you like to talk about?" He says, uh, "Yeah, I thought it's your interview." So be more proactive. You know, think about, you know, you could connect the storyline. You could say, you know, you could turn the table. You could ask the question. It's your interview as well. So also drive the conversation. The best interviews I've seen, they weren't mine. The best interviews I've seen where I got off the call and I realized I was being interviewed.
Yeah.
So, and it was a good experience. I enjoyed it because I think there was some really insightful questions were asked by the candidate. Candidate clearly did her homework. So it was a lady, and she was going through a couple of points, and then she led me into a conversation where she was actually interviewing me. And at the end, I was a bit perplexed, really, but you know, it clearly showed kind of leadership capability and, you know, being comfortable to having a conversation and driving the conversation as well. At the end, interviews, I know that people dislike them. I never did. I think interviews are needed to talk about the capabilities and make sure that you're meeting both expectations, both what you want to do and what the other part needs. And connecting those two things are, of course, are really important. I talked about those 3 circles. And in the end, you know, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. My father-in-law always said, you know, everything's written down in the book. Now, whether you agree to it or not, it may help. You know, just don't be too stressed. What you don't know, you don't know. But prepare. And I think what I can't understand is people coming onto interviews unprepared. That use you've got LinkedIn, you've got Twitter, you've got the corporate websites. There's usually loads written about strategy and direction, and use your own brain power to then project how could you help this organization to then, you know, maybe deliver more value, and making that connection, of course, to the stuff that you love. And you have to have some evidence and material and experience, of course, goes without saying. But if you're connecting those 3 things, you know, I bet you'll have an exciting conversation, which is, you know, both fulfilling and maybe also very positive.
Yeah, and I think that's really key, that maybe people forget in an interview, it is a conversation between people, and you want to look for connections, like you said at the start. So really good advice on, yeah, obviously LinkedIn's great, isn't it? You can get so much information out of LinkedIn, and using it as a conversation starter and getting off to a warm
Yeah, or
start.
you don't have to start with it. I mean, like I mentioned, use it subtly. Don't
Yeah,
kind of go in, bombard
yeah,
your counterpart with all the great insights you know about them, when it's also a bit weird. Just use it subtly. I mean, you can, when you start the interview process, you said, okay, hello, my name is Gunnar Menzel. I'd love to work for you. Here are the things that I did. And then if you know that the other side loves running as well, because and if you run as well, of course, don't make it up, because
yeah,
they'll find out. But it might be, you might add that to it, and then they say, oh, you run as well. Oh, great. Which marathon did you run? Oh, I done London. Oh, when did you do London? Oh, I did that in 2018. It's mad, isn't it? Yes. And you start having, at least for 20 seconds, something that is a personal conversation. You have a personal experience, and then you have a different report with the person. You don't see the person as a machine, particularly now with Teams.
yeah,
Interviews being virtual. 80% of our communication is body language. So you can only see my shoulders and my head. You
yeah.
sometimes see my hand, but not all the time. So it's really difficult. So you need something else to create a report, and use those tools to find something out about people. Don't be too creepy, of course, but use it appropriately. I mean, that's it shows that you care. It shows that you make an effort. And like I said, I sometimes go on interviews, and I do ask them halfway through. I said, do you know anything about me? I said, you're the CTIO for Capgemini. I know anything else? No. You didn't look me up on LinkedIn? No. Why not? So why not?
Yeah.
It's so easy. Yeah.
No,
And if you also see, if you do that, you see the subjects I'm interested in. Microsegmentation, for instance, or microservices, or the different methodology of software engineering or development, or data centers or sustainability. There's an arm's length of things that I'm interested in, and I'll share them. So, connect that. And I think that's, of course, it's easier said than done, and I understand that. Particularly when you're young, you're starting your career, interviews are quite daunting, but they mustn't be. And don't forget, counterpart is still a person as well. And they might be stressed themselves. They might be nervous. Not everybody does good interviews. So, you look at that, I think may help kind of take the stress a bit out of those conversations.
no, I think we'll definitely take that away and use that when we're preparing candidates for interviews now. And it is quite similar. We always do say that, these things. So it's great to hear it from you validating it as well. Obviously, you talked about things that you're particularly interested in, and obviously I looked at your background, and obviously can see like innovation being such a common theme, and obviously the white papers you've written as well, on these topics. For you, like innovation is obviously such an important topic in tech, but like, how do you create like a culture that embraces like innovation? Like what advice would you give there?
Gee, that's a wide question, Patrick. I mean, first, and you need to look at what innovation actually is.
Yeah,
And I have to quote from somebody else. It's not a quote. I think there was a Nobel Prize winner. I think we use Ukrainian or Russian, won a Nobel Prize in the 1920s or so. So it's not IT related, but he had this fantastic saying, and he said, "Innovation is seeing what everybody has seen and thinking what nobody has thought." Now, so it's about sometimes the obvious that are quite innovative. Like I was doing an innovation presentation actually this week in Paris, and I was using another example. When you have, I don't have one here, but a suitcase when you go traveling. When I grew up in the 70s and 80s, suitcases were heavy, they were bulky, and they didn't have wheels. And then somebody clever thought, oh well, put some wheels on suitcase, and you can wheel it. How innovative is that? Now, that's not rocket science. It's applying two things. What everybody has seen, a suitcase, and a wheel, but nobody has thought to put them together. So innovation sometimes is something that is quite banal, quite obvious. It doesn't have to be rocket science. Now, of course, there are in tech some innovations that are there. Like, for instance, if you look at quantum computing, which is the next, I guess, the next blueprint, the next compute power that we have. At the moment, it's binary, so 0 and 1. Designed many years ago, probably 100 years ago, or even longer than that. Quantum, it's not been around that long. Maybe operational when I go into retirement in the next 10 years. So that's quite innovative. So both extremes are there. One, the suitcase with wheels, and the other is quantum. And now in IT, and there's also something that I always say is really important. IT technology like AI, artificial intelligence, cloud, DevOps, these things, they're not innovation in themselves. They are means to an end. So technology is a means to an end. AI is a means to an end. Artificial intelligence. By the way, in artificial intelligence, there's no intelligence. It's a rules engine. There is no real intelligence. There's no intelligence that can make intelligent decisions. Every decision that a computer takes is pre-programmed, pre-ruled. They learn, of course, they can learn, but only through patterns, and only by throwing millions of patterns at a system. So it learns, stores that pattern. So artificial intelligence is not intelligence, but it certainly creates a lot of impact, and is innovative because it can create new opportunities. But all the technology you can see around us is of course important, is impactful, but it's all a means to an end. The end is the impact they create to the end user, to the customer. Going back to digital, our starting conversation, making an impact to somebody or something, delivering some value in terms of speed or quality or feature to something. Could be a person, could be a system. That's what technology enables. And innovation, of course, in there, it's finding a new way of doing something better. The official definition of innovation is, creating something that delivers value, either against a requirement or against a challenge or against an opportunity or against a demand. Of course, it's innovative that we can send a rover onto Mars. Things currently driving around, taking samples. We haven't yet invented the technology to actually pick it up again. So, the Mars mission is assuming that in the next 30 years, whatever that rover is keeping, I think it's collecting stone samples and keeping it in a particular site. And then there's the assumption that we will innovate, we will devise a device that can fly there, pick it up and fly back to the Earth. Which I don't think is possible yet. So innovation, of course, has a wide spectrum, but it's in IT, it's all about finding something better or applying technology in a way that delivers a better outcome, a better challenge. And most of technology is really a means to an end. Cloud is the same. Cloud is not a target solution. I have no client coming to me and saying, I need some cloud. No client telling me, I need speed, I need better capability. And cloud is a good vehicle for that. So think about vehicle technology as a vehicle delivering an outcome, and innovation can be a broad spectrum from the suitcase with the wheels to the quantum computing. But it's all about delivering an impact, creating value, delivering an outcome, using technology, of course, to enable that outcome.
Brilliant. And you mentioned DevOps earlier, and obviously from my side, it's a key thing that we look at. We recruit for, and obviously looking at your LinkedIn, it says that you're a member of the Global DevOps Advisory Board, which sounds obviously quite a grand
it's
board.
Very grand. It is very grand. It's very
chateau in France. You'd be there.
No,
but DevOps for us, I'm a non-technical person myself, but obviously I talk to DevOps engineers and businesses that want to incorporate DevOps. For you, what is it, and how do you actually implement it successfully and make it performing?
So this is a term or a kind of a subject that's quite close to my heart, because I come from that background. It's also something I've been battling with for many years. So the term DevOps was only coined in 2009 during a conference. It's really the short version of development and operations. And it really comes from, if you look back a bit in history, so it comes from the natural way of designing solutions. The way we learned to design solutions was always you had a pre-project engagement, so where you scope the solution. Then you had the development team that would cut the code and do the testing. So you had a development environment. You may have a UAT environment, you use the acceptance environment, an OT environment, operating testing environment. So you had a development team that focuses on developing the functional and non-functional characteristic of that solution that you have initiated. So say, for instance, it was a CRM solution, so customer relationship management solution. And you in that development team. In the 90s and 2000s, you would have a dedicated team for doing that. You had developers, project managers, architects, engineers, all working on with the client, delivering what the client was requiring. Now, once you finished, you usually had this sign-off point where you finished everything. You then had to prove that you comply with the functional and non-functional characteristics through tests and sign-offs, mostly manual, through UAT, user acceptance tests. The user would accept, yes, that does what we needed. And then at that point, almost like a hand crank activity, you would hand that over physically, almost, to a separate team that would operate all that stuff. So that team that operated the stuff would typically not, I'm talking 2000s, would typically not be involved in at all during the development process. They would be sitting, usually managing other applications at the same time. So you have your application management team, your infrastructure management team would have ITSM or kind of ServiceNow capability to manage environments. They would be completely separate. So you had your development team and your operations team. Now that, of course, is fraught with issues and problems, particularly from a quality perspective and from a time perspective. Take ages to put a critical or mission critical system live, sometimes months, or even a whole quarter or half a year. So it was quite common for large environments to do one release per quarter or one release every half a year. So no functional changes throughout the month are very different to what you actually need today. Microservices, you do a release every day or every hour. So in 2009, some people clever thought, well, we need to move development and operations closer together. So we need to have them more working together. How could we do that? Well, you need to take down the barrier. You need to obviously automate. You need to connect the functional requirements and the non-functional characteristics more with operations. We know. Why don't we involve the guys and girls from operations in the development? Oh, that's a good idea. Why don't we have one team, DBAs, who both do development and operations? Great idea. Why don't we have service engineers who build Linux servers, both for development and operations? And then suddenly somebody thought, well, if that's the case, then why don't we have one deployment pipeline? Oh, yeah, great. Why don't we have one CI/CD? That's really cool. And then you started to see new tools appearing that helped doing code promotions in an automatic fashion. So DevOps is no more nor less in the basic concept. It's the basic idea of taking down that barrier between development and operations, not just punching holes in there, but taking it completely down and having one continuous circle from initiation through definition, through design, test, implement, and run. And everything else, and you don't have to be technical for that, everything else comes from that. So your new two pizza teams. So the idea that you fold everything into kind of a team that's dedicated, responsible for a particular function from strategy down to operations, comes from that idea. I mean, that's the cost structure that Amazon had coined, the two pizza teams. So it's a team of maximum 12. Two American pizza sizes can feed up to 12 people. And in those teams, they will deal with a particular function throughout the life cycle. That was never the case before. You had them all complete in different sections. And DevOps, first and foremost, is that. And then, of course, you've got all these tools that you see nowadays. They're basically focusing on automating the various different stages, virtualizing it, making sure you can turn a key and you have a development environment, including application data and databases. And you can turn a key again, and it goes down again. Before, you had to manually configure all these servers and provision them in development and in UAT, which of course takes time and is fraught with danger from a quality perspective, because you can never replicate in that fashion what you have in life. Therefore, you cannot actually test everything what you have in life. So you only knew if it was working really when you put it into live, which usually was too late, because then you would have an outage. So you have to back it out again. So it was, before DevOps, it was quite difficult in the waterfall area. So you had DevOps and Agile coming kind of online at the similar time.
Amazing. And what do you think the future is for DevOps?
So I think, you know, you have, so DevOps by nature comes, like I mentioned, quite on the infrastructure engineering side. So it was really kind of the intent to have one platform between your dev, your performance test environment, your operational test environment, your live environment. You know, organizations that are really cloud native don't have that. There is no differentiation between dev and live. It's all the same. So you have your whole architecture designed so you can just flick a port number and you move between a pre-release to a release. I mean, Amazon, Google, that's how they do it. They actually have customers who love to test. So they are they're testing the features. So, and I think the future for DevOps is clearly kind of moving much more from an infrastructure application more into even the business side. So whereas, you know, before it was quite infra and techie related, I think it's co-inversing or connecting more to the agile idea, where, you know, you're co-inventing, co-innovating, co-developing, co-running together with the business at the same time, and you don't have these separation of concerns: business, technology, development, operation, and then you have different teams being responsible for these things, you know, with all these walls that sits behind them or in front of them. So I think, you know, the future is making sure that gets kind of abstracted higher up.
Amazing. Well, thanks for that, Gunnar. And I think that's obviously the allocation of time that we have today, and really appreciate all your thoughts there. And yeah, once again, thanks for continuing the conversation.
Well, thank you, Patrick. And like I said on a plane, quite interesting to connect. And I love, you know, having conversations like this. I think I hope there's at least some value that you can draw, or whoever listens to this can draw from that. Of course, there's the offer. If you're interested, link up with me on LinkedIn. You can find me. As I mentioned, not so difficult. I'm very happy also to answer questions if you have any. Of course, within reason. But, you know, if absolutely, if I don't have the time or I can't, I will tell you. But you know, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't cost to ask. You know, you should make the most of opportunities like that if you can.
Absolutely. I know you're a keen writer as well. As you say, you write the Technovision paper.
That's right. So that's another thing that might be of interest, having a look at what are kind of key trends in the IT industry. Also, so something you can directly get from my LinkedIn profile. But yeah, and I think I've written over 100 posts. It's quite interesting. If you scroll through my posts, you can see my earliest DevOps papers that I've written on LinkedIn. I think that was back in 13 or 14. Some of the concepts are still the same. I haven't really changed much. Of course, technology has changed significantly. My style of writing has changed as well, and I think my graphical skills have improved. But you know, everybody starts from somewhere. So
brilliant. Well, obviously, for anyone who's keen on those topics, I highly recommend you check them out on Gunnar's LinkedIn.
And connect.
Thanks a lot. Brilliant.